This is Gemara and Beitzah Daf Zayin, the Daf for Yom Kippur, all the learning for this month, the month of Tishrei, as we get into Yom Kippur, and then eventually Sukkot has been generously sponsored as a tremendous chosr for Shlema Benita, Mirz Hashem. He should only see continued recovery and good health. Of course, the rest of our Chaim Ben Vega Chaim Ben Sar Shalom Sibin Reize Edel Shmuel Yosef Ben Henya Freda Shalom Sibin Reize serves Baskinati Basim Chayei Yisrael B'Mindel as friends Shalei Shalom Basim Shayfik Shaychan Shmuel Ati Dino Khan Reiz Chaim Ben Simva Adin Ena B'Shin Min Sviv Vegevern Mechal Shem Sel Hu Rivka Vat Hashem Tel Sim Mechal Esther B'Tzoich Sha'ar Chali Yisrael as well as Chashich B'Shal Chaim Devar and Shemiriam Bas Reizel Gittel. As I'm sure many of you have realized, many of you have commented, I always appreciate the beautiful feedback. We're getting these shiurim up, Baruch Hashem, nice and early. So anyone who would like to prepare before Yom Kippur, etc., as well, I'll be traveling in, spend these sukkahs in the Poconos, so everyone could try to, stay up to date. So let's get to it. Today's daf, Beitzah Tes Zayin. We're on the bottom of Tes Vav Amid Beis. A bit more Haggadah coming up before we get back into the sugya of Erev Tavshilin. Says the Gemara, Tani Rav Tachlifa Achlua, the Rav Noi Chayza. Rav Tachlifa, who is the brother of Rav Noi Chazal, learned, as we move over to today's daf, Tezayin Amar Aleph, a very, very famous Gemara and a very apropos Gemara learning right before the Yom Tovim. Kol Mezay Neisa Shaladim Ksuvim LaMersha Shana V'ad Yom HaKippurim Mamish today Yom Kippur. What's Siyat Dishmaya? To have Yom HaKippurim, I don't know how many daf in Shas has the word Yom HaKippurim, but to have it on Yom Kippur's daf. Kol Mezay Neisa Shaladim are set aside and prepared for him from Rosh Hashanah till Yom Kippur, Chot, except for and that which you spend in Yantif, and as well, of course, bundle of Talmud Torah, and that which you're going to spend to teach your children Torah, which is, says the Gemara, if you spend a little bit on Yantif, on Shabbos, on your children's learning, Hashem will give you less. But if you go and you give extra, it's out of the cheshbon, it's not part of the calculation. If you're supposed to make $1 million and you spend an extra $100,000 on Shabbos and Yantif and your children, you'll make 1.1. How? God will take care of it, no worries. Amar Rav Avua, where do we learn this out from? Maikara. What? The pasuk Tiku v'achaydesh shayfer, the pasuk of Rosh Hashanah. You should blow shayfer. And the pasuk says, "Bakesa liyoim chagenu," at the appointed time of the chag of the yontif. But the wording of the pasuk is bakesa, which literally means covered. Explains the Gemara, and of course we've seen this Gemara elsewhere. What is the yontif? That the moon is covered. There's only one yontif that the moon is not visible by, meaning a yontif at the beginning of the month. That's Rosh Hashanah, and it says with regards to Rosh Hashanah, Israel, that is a chayk for Klal Yisrael. It's a decree, Mishpal Elokei Yaakov, a day of judgment for the God of Yaakov. My mashma da'chayk lishna de mizayniu. The word chayk, the word decree, also refers to mizayna. It refers to support and sustenance. T'chsev, as the pasuk says, v'achlu es chukam asher natzalem parai, and the 8 chukam, the 8 rations that Parai gave to them, and that's the proof that chayk, which is referred to Rosh Hashanah, is a day of sustenance, a day that Hashem decides how much money you're going to make. Marzuch Amar Me'ach, a different pasuk. Hachifeni lechem chuki, feed me my rations of bread, and that is din and sugya number 1 we'll call up today, that all monies of Shabbos, of Yantiv, of Talmud Torah, some people remember from the word Tishrei, Torah, Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and Yantif. Torah referring to, obviously, like we said, that learning with your children, that is not a part of the calculations. Of course, you have to spend somewhat within your means. You can't go crazy, perhaps, Mishnah Berurah says. But what is a wonderful chizik before we go into Yantif, all the expenses, to learn that it's nothing to worry about. We shall be talking and rely upon, as we're learning the Gemara together, that Hashem will take care of it. Tanya, we learned in a Beitzah, a famous Gemara. They said about Shammai every day he would eat for Shabbos. How do you do that? I found a beautiful animal. Shabbos. He would set aside, this is going to be for Shabbos. And then then he found something even better. So the first animal, which already was covered Shabbos animal, they would take the second and put it for Shabbos, and he would eat the first one. So everything he ate had an element of Shabbos, because it's for Shabbos. No, this is for Shabbos. So this I'm eating for lunch. My lunch is also a covered Shabbos. Hillel had a different way of going about it. Everything he did was L'Shem Shamayim, meaning Hillel went more the bitachon route. He didn't say this is going to be for Shabbos. Rather, he knew that Hashem is going to give him each day that which he needed. As Rashi points out, Hashem's going to give me every day what I need, and therefore I don't have to prepare for Shabbos until towards the end of the week. Tanya, we learned in the Beitzah 5 lines from the wide lines. Nami achi beishami aimim mechad from the first of the week, prepare for Shabbos, meaning everything you do should be for Shabbos. But Beisil aimim, no. Baruch Hashem yom yom, you bless Hashem each and every day, and therefore you have the bitachon and you prepare for Shabbos later in the week. Amar Rav Chama, Rav Chanina, a similar Gemara, because it doesn't have to do with Shabbos. We've learned this already in the Gemara in Shabbos. Someone who gives a present to his friend, you don't have to tell him about it. He let us secretly stick some money in his pocket. You don't have to tell him. Shnamar, as a pasuk says, Moshe Yadaki Karan Arpanav. Moshe Rabbeinu did not know that his face was glowing. Hashem didn't tell him that he had this beautiful gift of a glowing face. So we see you're allowed to give someone a gift without telling him. Says the Gemara on the first wide line, Meisvei asks the Gemara, it says the pasuk to know that I am Hashem that made you holy. And what do we learn out from this pasuk? Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, I have a wonderful present in my storage house for Shabbos. His name is Shabbos. And I want to give Klal Yisrael this beautiful gift called Shabbos. Hashem said to Moshe, go and tell them that what? If you give a child something, you got to tell the mommy, I gave your kid something. So we see the exact opposite. We started off saying you don't have to tell someone you give him a gift. But you see here, you clearly have to tell someone that Hashem told Moshe, tell Klal Yisrael of the wonderful gift of Shabbos that I'm giving to them. Answers the Gemara 4 lines down. If they're going to eventually find out, you don't have to tell them. But if you're not going to find out, then you have to tell them. Asks the Gemara, Shabbos not matana avidili gluyei. What do you mean? We're eventually going to find out about Shabbos. So why did Hashem have to tell Moshe Rabbeinu about it? Answers the Gemara, matan schar lo avidili gluyei. It's true. We're going to find out about Shabbos, but we're not going to find out the wonderful reward, the high prestige that Shabbos has held, that has come from Beis Genazai. It's come from the treasure house of the King of the Kings. And therefore, since we will not find out, that's the reason why you have to tell. So we're saying you could give someone a present if we'll eventually find out. You'll let us slip him that $100. He's eventually going to find the money. But if it's something that he's not going to know about, then you have to tell him about it. Amar Mar, going a bit deeper into this topic, if you give a child something, you got to tell the mother. How should you tell the mother? The mother's not here, so what do? Says the Gemara, put a little oil on the kid's face, put a little makeup on the kid's face, and the mother will see it, wonder what's going on, and then she'll realize, someone gave you a present, and that's the reason why you have this extra makeup on your face. Ask the Gemara 1 second. Nowadays, what would happen if you see a kid all makeup and paint-faced? You're going to be nervous that who knows what's going on with this kid? Some witchcraft, he has some Indian face paint. So what can you do nowadays? Take the item, you give the kid chocolate, put a little chocolate on the kid's cheek. So the mother will see, I see my kid had chocolate, and she'll realize the gift that you gave to the child. All the mitzvahs that Hashem gave us, He gave in public. Chutz, Mishabesh, and Aslam B'tzini gave us Shabbos in private. Shenemar, Beinu, Bein B'nei Yisrael, Oisi Le'olam, it's a sign, but it's between me, says Hashem, and Klal Yisrael. It's a private matter. Shabbos. He asks the Gemara 1 second, Lulanchi Nachrim. So the Goyim shouldn't get punished. What do they do wrong? What do they do wrong for not keeping Shabbos? They didn't know about it. Answers the Gemara, Shabbos, I do adinu. Of course they'll find out about Shabbos, but what was the private item about Shabbos? Similar to the reward. The Goyim are not going to know the incredible reward that you're going to get for Shabbos. Another answer says the Gemara, they're also going to find out about the Matan Schar, but you know what the Goyim don't know about Shabbos? They don't know that we get that extra neshama, that extra spiritual boost on Shabbos. Hashem gives an neshama yisir to a person that is Shabbos and Motzei Shabbos before Shabbos and on Motzei Shabbos. Allah takes from him Imanu Shenamar Shabbos Einafash Kivin Shabbos Voy of Das Nefesh, that we lose our extra soul after Shabbos, and that's the point that the Goyim do not know about it. The wonderful word of Shabbos. wonderful mile of Shabbos, the secrecy of Shabbos, and the incredible idea of this neshama yisera, this actual spiritual boost that we get on Shabbos. Says the Gemara, back into our sugya of Erev Tavshilin. We're at the 2 dots, about 20 lines at the bottom. Tazayin Amud Aleph. Adam Tavshil Me'erev Yantif. How do you make an Erev Tavshilin? You make a dish before Yantif. Amar Abayi says, Abayi lo shanu ala tavshil aval pas loy. You have to make a dish, a cooked dish. Bread does not suffice, says Abayi. Says the Gemara, why not? Pasta loy. If you're going to tell me dinam lafis be none, because it has to be something that's eaten with pas, something that's eaten with the main of a meal. Upas loy melafa, and pas is not eaten with the main of the meal. It is the main, but you don't eat it with the main. Says the Gemara, they can't be vadaisanami when it comes to porridge loy melafta. You don't eat porridge with your main of your meal again because it is the main of the meal. How do I know that? Damar Avzira statement that we've seen. Honey Babyloi Tipshai, these foolish Babylonians. Tachlinam benam, they eat bread with bread. They have bread with porridge. What are you doing? It's bread and bread. You don't put bread with bread. You put bread with something else. So we see that porridge is not considered something that's melafis as apaskos with the main, and yet you're allowed to use porridge for the Erev Tavshilin. So you're allowed to. So what is the reason? Says the Gemara that Abaye holds that you're not allowed to use bread for your Erev Tavshilin. Elamidi explains the Gemara the Erev Tavshilin has to be something that's not normal. A regular piece of bread you always have binan. Not to use when you could use daisa, but you can't use bread. Another way of learning that which we just said. The exact same statement. But now the Gemara asks my taima. If you're going to tell me the reason why you can't use bread because it has to be a not common item, pas is common, but daisa is not common, and yet of course, this is the opposite opinion. The previous wording in the Gemara was all going with understanding that you could, yes, use daisa, and therefore the Gemara built it that way. This way, the Gemara is saying you can't be ma'ariv, you cannot use Erev Tavshilin with your porridge. So now the Gemara is asking, so why do you be allowed to use your bread? I'm sorry, why would it be dependent whether it's common or not? Porridge is not common. Elo, what must the reason be? It must be something that's eaten with the main, and bread is not eaten with the main. But I asked the Gemara 1 second. Porridge is also not eaten with the main. How do we know that? These foolish Babylonians, they eat bread with bread. So says the Gemara, that's the second reason why, according to this lashon, it's not as conclusive why you cannot use bread as your Erev Tavshilin. Says the Gemara, according to the second lashon, it comes out that both bread nor daisa nor porridge are you allowed to use as Erev Tavshilin. According to the first lashon, you can't use bread, you could use porridge. Says the Gemara, Tani Rav Chia, 8 lines on the bottom. First words of the line are Rav Chia. Tani Rav Chia, Adoshim Shabishuli Akadera. You have a pot of lentils, and after you finish eating, you have a few lentils on the bottom of the pot. Says Rav Chia, Saimach Aleim. You got to use that for your Erev Misham Erev Tavshilin. Now Rashi here points out something very important. Let's look at Rashi, about 8 lines on the wide line. Saimach Aleim, Me Erev Yomtiv L'Shem Erev. Meaning, if on Erev Yomtiv you see in the bottom of your pot you have some lentils left over, says Rav Chia, you're allowed to say, that's my Erev Tavshilin. Doesn't mean you leave over food on Yontif, of course not. It means that Erev Yontif, you find some leftover food, you're allowed to use that as your Erev, but now the Gemara qualifies Vani Mili. This big kazayis. Of course it has to have a kazayis worth. Rev Yitzchak Breder Rev Yehuda, Shamnuna Shal Gabi Yasak, in the fat on the knife. Gaira, you could clean it off, and as well, the fat itself could be your Erev Tavshilin. Again, the Gemara explains Vani Mili this big kazayis. A lot of fat on the knife, it has to be a kazayis worth. Amar Rav Asi, Amar Rav, Dogim Kitanim Meluchem Ein Mem Shem Mishuli Nachem. Random statement. Small fish that are salted have no problem of bishul akum. Why not? A common din, says Rashi towards the end of the narrow lines, explains Rashi, the whole reason of bishul akum is because of chasanis. But there's no such gezira saying that's eaten raw. And since fish is eaten raw, there's no issue if a guy cooks your fish. Whether this is halach l'maisa nowadays, of course we all know about sushi. The question is whether it's the majority or a very normal thing to eat fish raw. We're definitely almost there, if not there already. Therefore there will be no no bishul akum on fish. Amar Rav Yosef explains Rav Yosef, which is why we brought this down 2 lines on the bottom. And if the guy roasted, you can use it for erev tavshilin. However, but if the guy makes his dish called kisa darsana, this mashed fish hash ulcer, then it's forbidden. Says the Gemara. The reason why the last Rashi points out, because there's flour and it's a mezainis breaded fish, and the mezainis, the flour in it, is not eaten raw, and therefore there is an issue of bishul akum. Therefore it's ulcer. Says the Gemara. Pshita, of course. Answers the Gemara. I would have thought, moving over to Tazayin on the base, harsana ikr, maybe the fish is the ikr. Kamash blan kibcha ikr. You see from here that the flour is the main ingredient, and therefore there is bishul akum, and you're not allowed to eat it. This is perhaps one of the sources that they come from when they discuss schnitzel, whether it's mezainis or shahakol. As you see over here, the Gemara is saying that the kimcha is the ikr. Perhaps there's a chiddush that the Gemara has to speak it over here. Perhaps there's a difference between the thickness of the breading, or maybe this dish is something completely, entirely different. Amar Rav Abba explains Rav Abba, a rubi tashilin tzrichi kazayis, like we just said many times, it has to be at least the volume of a kazayis. Ibayilu asked the Gemara, what do you mean kazayis? Kazayis echel lekulam, I don't kazayis kol echel vechel. Do you need one kazayis? Or if you're making it here for tashilin for 5 people, you need 5 kazayis, enough for that every person can have a kazayis. Tashema, the Gemara brings a proof, Amar Rav Abba, Amar Rav, a rubi tashilin tzrichi kazayis, bin echel bin lameya. So one kazayis, regardless how many people are cooking with this erev, which of course is something which is known. You have one person in the household that makes the erev tavshilin, you have your piece of fish, you have your piece of chicken, you have your challah, you have your matzah, and, which we'll point out perhaps why in a moment, as long as you have one, it works for everyone. Says the Gemara, Tanan. So we just said it has to be a kazayis. Asks the Gemara, if you eat your erev or you lose it, you're not allowed to cook anymore on Yontif for Shabbos. Shire me man who calls you if a little bit of the erev is left. You're allowed to cook. Says the Gemara, what's kolshu? My kolshu, lavav gavda like kazayis. Sounds like you don't have to have a kazayis. And you, Rav Abba, just taught me that the minimum quantity is a kazayis. Answers the Gemara, this big kazayis. A kolshu means that there is a kazayis left over, and therefore it's not a question. Tashema, another question. Tavshil zetzli, if I have a cooked food for an erev tavshilin, it's not to be roasted. The tavshil, the cooked food of the erev tavshilin, zetzli can be roasted. Vafilu kafush, even pickled shaluk, or one more time. Kavush, pickled, shaluk, cooked, mavushal, or very cooked, vikulias or spinus, or which is this mackerel fish, a fish that requires very little amounts of cooking. You just to put some warm water on it. Says the Beitzah, the beginning and the end of this item doesn't have a measurement. It says the Gemara, what seemingly does this Beitzah say? You can use a cooked dish and a salted dish and a pickled dish. My love ain't loy shear, klal. Sounds like there's no shear. You're telling me that to be a kazayis. We have a clear Bryce that says ein loy shear. There's no minimum measurement. Answers the Gemara, loy ein loy shear lamayla yesh loy shear lamata. Of course, there's a minimum quantity. The Bryce just means to point out there's no maximum quantity. It can start very large, and even if it subsequently shrinks, it will still be okay for your erev tavshilin. Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav eruv tavshilin zrichan das. You need to have knowledge of the erev tavshilin. Which, by the way, we just concluded that it has to be a kazayis. We had 2 questions, we refuted both, and that is Allah, as we saw 2 lines on the top, that it needs to be a kazayis. Says Rav Huna Marav now, erev tavshilin tzrichan das. Says Mar Pshita, das miniach binan. Of course, you have to know you created an erev tavshilin. The question is, says Gemara, das mi shehaniach loy binan loy. Can I make an erev for someone else? I know I'm making it, but do you know that I'm making it for you? It doesn't work if you do not know that I'm making it for you. That's the question. Can you make an erev tavshilin on behalf of someone else? And I think everyone here knows the answer. How? Tashema, says the Gemara, you made 1 erev for the whole narda. Ravasi marba akula tevaria, 1 erev for the entirety of tevaria. Therefore, we see you could make an erev tavshilin for someone else, even without necessarily them knowing it. Which we're going to see in a moment. This is the famous halacha that if someone forgets to make an erev tavshilin, he's saimach on the rav. Let's see right now. Says the Gemara, Machros of Yaakov Bar Idi. The 2 dots in these Gemaras a little bit random. Machros of Yaakov Bar Idi announced, Mishlai niach erev tavshilin. Yavav yismach al shalikur lion mine. Vad kama. How many people can be on his erev? Amram nechumi bar zachari mishmein tabayat chum Shabbos. Whoever's within his tchum, no problem relying on his erev. Says the Gemara, there was a blind person that was saying over the Mishnayos in front of Mar Shmuel. So Shmuel saw this guy is sad. Why are you sad? I forgot to make your Tavshilin. How am I going to cook for Shabbos? Rely on my Erev, says Mar Shmuel. Great, so he went and cooked. Lishana the next year, Chazia Davi Atzif. He sees again, he said, why you sad? Again, I forgot to make Meir of Tavshilin. So what does Shmuel say to him this time? You're negligent. Everyone else can rely on Meir, but not you, because you're negligent. And this is where the unique halacha comes in, that if you forget your Erev Tavshilin, you could be rely upon the Rav one time. And the big question is, what does it mean one time? Does it mean once in your lifetime? Does it mean once a year? In this story, it did say Lishana. Lishana doesn't necessarily mean a year. It can mean another occurrence. The many Paiskim say, as long as it's not 2 in a row. Because the whole detail here that we're trying to figure out, were you a Pesheya, were you negligent? So 1 second, you have to see, were you negligent? Maybe there wasn't a Yantif in Shabbos back to back or 2 in a row for a while, so it wasn't negligence. It could have been whatever amount of time. So this is where the Rav comes in to determine what level of negligence is called negligence. And many are lenient as long as you didn't forget 2 in a row, then they'll allow you to rely on the Rav. But this is the source, a very famous halacha that Mar Shmuel said, you're Pesheya, you can't rely on me anymore. Taner Rabbanan, says the Gemara, a bit more about Yantav and Shabbos. Yantav Shechal Liyas Berev Shabbos, Yantav falls on a Friday. You're not allowed to make an Erev Techumen or an Erev Chatzeros, concept that we've seen extensively in the Gemara Shabbos and Erevin. Erev Techumen to allow you to carry outside the Tchum, to extend your Tchum. Erev Chatzeros to allow you to carry from the Chatzeros into the adjoining larger chutzner and mavui, so you're not allowed to create that on Yantiv for Shabbos. Rabbi Omer, Marvin Erev Chatzeros, you're allowed to do Avaloy Erev Techumim. Why? Says Rabbi, beautiful. On Yantif, you're allowed to carry within your chutzner, and therefore, since on Yantif you're allowed to carry from the Chatzeros to the mavui, therefore you could create something now to permit you to continue carrying into Shabbos. But on Yantif you cannot carry out of the Tchum, and therefore you cannot create an Erev Tchum in Manyantif. Perhaps the Lamdas Chasam Sefer says is, since the Isser isn't here yet, you're not undoing something. The whole problem here is Tikkun, you're creating something, you're fixing something, which is not allowed. But if there's no Isser yet, you're already allowed to carry from the Chatzar to the Mavui. Within all the Chatzeros, I say Chatzar to Chatzar, so to make the Erev Chatzeros now, to allow you to continue, that's going to be allowed. It says the Gemara, whether we go with Rabbi allowing you to create the Erev Chatzeros on Yantif for Shabbos. And this last point, that we'll conclude with this. Ibailu asked the Gemara, what does it mean we paskin like Rabbi? Does it mean lekula or lechumra? A little bit of an interesting question. Does it mean we go with Rabbi to allow you to make the Erev Chatzeros, or lechumra? Says Mar Pshita, the lekula kamar, because that is what Rabbi said. He was mekel, obviously. Says the Gemara, Misham Deshalach, Rav Elazar legaila. The reason why we had a question is because Rav Elazar sent a message to Galus to Bavel. Like Atem Shainim Bavel. Not like you learned in Bavel. You learned the whole Beitzah wrong, said Rav Elazar. It's not like you said Rabbi Matir v'cham Eisrim. Rather, it's the opposite. Rabbi Eisrim v'cham Matir. And of course, they didn't have written text. They didn't have Beitzahs written down, so sometimes you could forget and mix up names. So said Rav Elazar, you got it all wrong. Rabbi is the Machmir. You're not allowed to create Erev Chatzeros, the Chamar, the Mekilim. And now we have a question. What is the halacha? Or when we said we paskin like Rabbi, are we being Mekil or Machmir? And says the Gemara, Tashema, let's bring an answer. They did a story like Shmuel, who said that we pass like Rabbi, and Rav said, with these Rabbanim paskind, they messed up. So again, they went like Shmuel, who went like Rabbi, and then Rav says it's a mistake. So now the Gemara says, let's see, from this story, what do we see? If you're going to tell me they were makel like Rabbi, they allowed them to create Erev Chatzeros. Now I understand why Rav got all upset. He said, you made a mistake, because you were too makel, you allowed them to carry, and they're not allowed to. If they were just being machmir, not allowing them to create Erev Chatzeros, what do they mess up? Answers the Gemara, no, it's no proof. They messed up the public, moving over to Yedzayin Amar Aleph, tomorrow's daf. Hainu kel kula. That is the kula. That is the Kilko, like Rashi points out, that if they would have created Erev Chatziris, you would have been allowed to carry. So therefore, the fact that they were machmir, not allowing them to be make, would make it a bit difficult for the people who carried without any knowledge. Therefore, we do not have a clear proof whether we're being machmir or meko like Rav, and therefore the Gemara just concludes we don't know what Shmuel held like Rebbe, whether you could guess or no create Erev Chatzeros. But Amar Rav, Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Rav Huna, halacha ki Rebbe ule aser, explicit brisa that says you're going with Rebbe.